Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Lake Orion Sports Update. I'm Kevin McCormick, and on today's show, we're going to share with you all the latest updates from the winter sports season coming up right now. The Lake Orion varsity hockey team continued their regular season with a home game against Detroit Country Day Jackets on February 2nd. The Dragons' Joe Brisky scored the first goal of the night on a power play with an assist from Connor Graham. During the second period, the Jackets stepped up their game and scored 2 goals and taking a 1-point lead. In the middle of the third, Lake Orion's Jacob Helzer was able to tie the game, scoring a goal with an assist by Graham. Neither team was able to score during the remaining minutes of regulation and sending the match into overtime. The Jackets were able to score in OT and came out on top, defeating the Dragons by a final score of 3-2. Lake Orion started a string of away games against the Farmington Falcons on February 4th. Both teams were scoreless in the first period, but things heated up in the second with a total of 5 goals scored, 4 belonging to the Dragons. TJ Hirschfield and Joe Brisky each scored even strength goals. Gabe Podick scored a power play goal, and Jacob Helzer scored a shorthanded goal, building a Lake Orion 3-point lead going into the third. Hirschfield scored his second goal of the night midway through the third, and the Falcons also scored a goal in the third. But it wasn't enough to catch up to the Dragons, and Lake Orion took the win 5-2. The Dragons returned to Farmington Hills Ice Arena on February 9th, this time to face off against Farmington Hills United. Neither team scored during the first 17 minutes of the game. Then Lake Orion scored 2 goals in the last 10 minutes of the second period, both by TJ Hirschfield, one of them being a shorthanded goal. The scoring for Lake Orion didn't end there. Connor Graham scored an early goal with the help of Joe Brisky. Josh Verkettich sealed the deal when he scored the final goal of the night with 1 minute 12 seconds left in regulation. The final score was Dragons 4, Farmington Hills United 0. The Dragons' next game against Berkeley would be a very important one. Lake Orion needed a win for a chance to take home the OAA Red title. Each team scored a goal during the first period. For Lake Orion, Gabe Podick scored a power play goal. The teams remained neck and neck in the second, with both teams scoring 2 goals each. Connor Graham chipped in a power play goal, and Gabe Podick earned his second score of the night. The Dragons kicked off the third period with a powerful offensive effort, scoring 3 goals, and the Bears not scoring any. Josh Verkettich and Lucas Barber helped secure the Dragon victory. Podick also scored, picking up a hat trick. The final score was 6-3 in Lake Orion's favor. After the victory against the Berkeley Bears, the Dragons then hosted a home game against Rochester United. Lake Orion was the first to get on the board. Jacob Helzer scored just 7 seconds into the second period. The next goal wouldn't happen until the third period. Rochester United's Griffin Harper scored a power play goal at the 10:53 mark. The Dragons gathered their focus and pushed forward for the remainder of the game. Not to be done after the Rockets' goals, Gabe Podick responded with a power play goal of his own, giving Lake Orion a 1-point lead. Near the end of the period, Rochester United pulled their goalie in an attempt to even the score. However, TJ Hirschfield scored an empty netter with only 10 seconds left in the game. Lake Orion won the game with a final score of 3-1 and also kept their chance of clinching the OAA Red title alive. This exciting game was filmed in its entirety as a part of our ONTV winter sports coverage. Check out our website at orionontv.org for future air times of this and other games during the remainder of the season. The games are also available on demand on our YouTube channel. Lake Orion traveled to the Crystal Fieldhouse for a tough game against Flint Powers Catholic, who is ranked as the number 2 team in the state. The Dragons gave their best, but it wasn't enough to overcome Flint Powers, which took the victory with a final score of 2-0. On February 23rd, Farmington Hills United came to the Detroit Skating Club. This game was Lake Orion's opportunity to secure the OAA Red title for the 2016-2017 season. Wasting no time, TJ Hirschfield scored Lake Orion's first goal during the first period. In the second, the Dragons ramped up the pressure and scored 3 more goals. Josh Verkettich chipped in 2 goals, one of which was a power play goal. and Connor Graham earned himself a shorthanded goal. Lake Orion kept up a strong defense as well and prevented Farmington Hills United from scoring a single goal all night. The Dragons won with the final score of 4-0 and took home the OAA Red title. High off the win, Lake Orion moved on to another home game against Reese Puffer on February 25th. Scoring started nearly immediately. Lake Orion's Gabe Podick scored the first goal of the evening in the first 40 seconds of the game. He was assisted by Josh and Jacob Frkedich with just under 12 minutes left in the first. Reese Puffer got on the board when Logan Homefield shot the puck past Jack Barker. Joe Brisky scored a goal of his own with 54 seconds left in the period with the help of Connor Graham and Gabe Podick, allowing Lake Orion to go into the second with a 1-point lead. Shortly after the start of the second, Reed Sales scored a goal for Reese Puffer to tie up the game. 2 minutes later, Garrett Reams added a power play goal to the board, giving Reese Puffer a small lead over the Dragons with just under 8 minutes remaining in the second. Lake Orion's Connor Graham scored a game-tying goal with help from Lucas Barber and Lucas Reith. Neither team was able to score during the third period, forcing an overtime period. However, the stalemate continued and the game ended tied at 3. This game was the last of the regular season for the Dragons, finishing with an overall 16-6-3 record. Lake Orion will compete in the MHSAA State Tournament beginning Tuesday, February 28th against Eisenhower. Congratulations to the Dragon hockey team on a fantastic regular season and good luck at the state championship. On January 30th, the girls varsity basketball team continued their regular season with a home game against their rivals, the Oxford Wildcats. Scoring was close throughout the game. Lake Orion only outscored the Wildcats by 3 during the first half. Oxford pushed back after the halftime break and scored 2 more points than the Dragons, but it wasn't enough to take the win. The final score was 51-50 in the Dragons' favor. Sydney Stringer was Lake Orion's leading scorer with 12 points, and teammate Sophie Canine followed closely behind with 11. For the next game, the Lady Dragons traveled to Bloomfield Hills. Unfortunately, it was a low-scoring game for Lake Orion. The Blackhawks outscored the Dragons by a whopping 16 points in the first half. Bloomfield Hills remained in control during the second half, scoring 20 points to Lake Orion's 18. Ultimately, the Blackhawks secured the win with a final score of 50-32. The Lady Dragons once again faced off against the Oxford Wildcats, this time traveling to Oxford High School. The game was low-scoring in comparison to the previous meeting. Lake Orion was down by 1 point at halftime. The Wildcats were able to put up more points during the second half and take the win 36-25. Tessa Noose led the way for Lake Orion, scoring 11 points. Shannon Falter chipped in 5. On February 10th, the Farmington Hills Harrison Hawks came to the Lake Orion Fieldhouse for a home game. The Dragons started off with a small lead of 25-23 to end the first half. The Dragons added to their lead in the second half, earning 9 more points than the Hawks. Lake Orion won with a final score of 50-39. The Lady Dragons continued their stint of home games on February 14th against the Lapeer Lightning. Lake Orion struggled to keep up with the Lightning, who had a 14-point lead for the first half. Lapeer continued their strong offense in the second, earning 9 more points than the Dragons. Lake Orion fell to the Lightning with a final score of 50-24. On February 16th, the Dragons hosted a home game against the Royal Oak Ravens at the Lake Orion Fieldhouse. Lake Orion ended the first half of the game in the lead by 2 points. In the third quarter, Royal Oak made a huge offensive push, scored 15 points to Lake Orion's 8. During the final quarter of the game, the Dragons scored 17 points to the Ravens' 9, closing the 5-point gap and leaving Lake Orion victorious. The final score was 43-40. The leading scorer for Lake Orion was Cameron Coltrane with 12 points, and she was followed by Lauren Van Loon, who had 10. On February 21st, the Lake Orion held a home game against West Bloomfield. The Dragons kept a strong lead through the first half, with the score being 26-15. Lake Orion was able to keep the lead going, earning 16-10 in the second half. The Dragons were able to take their second win in a row with a final score of 42-25. Cameron Coltrane led the Dragons with 10 points, and Tessa Noose was not far behind. She had 9. On February 23rd, Lake Orion hosted the OAA crossover game against North Farmington for the final game of the regular season. The Raiders started with an immense lead, overpowering the Dragons by 21 points in the first half. Lake Orion fought back in the second half, scoring 8 more points than the Raiders. It wasn't enough to overcome the large deficit in points, and North Farmington took the win 48-35. Lake Orion finished the season with an 8-12 overall record and a 5-5 league record. They also took third place in the OAA White Division. The Dragons will begin their playoff run with a game against Waterford Kettering on Monday, February 27th. Good luck to the girls varsity basketball team at the districts. Switching gears to boys varsity basketball, Lake Orion continued their season with a home game against Seaholm on January 31st. The Dragons started off with a 3-point lead going into halftime. Lake Orion kept putting the pressure on Maples and ultimately won the game with a final score of 62-56. Jamie Lewis was the leading scorer for Lake Orion with 22 points. Teammate Steve Zemieski also had a strong game, chipping in 18 points for the victory. The Dragons traveled to Rochester on February 7th for an away game against the Falcons. Lake Orion started off with a small lead in the first quarter, but the momentum quickly shifted as the Falcons shifted to the Falcons in the second, who finished the first half leading 31-13. Unfortunately, Lake Orion could not regain control, fell to the Falcons 58-25. Lake Orion continued their string of away games and traveled to Farmington on February 9th. The Falcons gained control right out of the gate and kept it that way for 3 straight quarters. In the fourth quarter, Lake Orion took a 4-point lead briefly, but Farmington quickly retaliated and took the win 54-49. Steve Zemieski put up 17 points for the Dragons, and Jamie Lewis added 14. Next up for the Dragons was a home game against the Eisenhower Eagles. Lake Orion picked up an early lead of 13-3 by the end of the first quarter and continued to expand the lead in the second by 12 points. Eisenhower chipped away at the Lake Orion lead and eventually ended up in the lead. Lake Orion lost the game 57-49. After a disappointing loss at home, the Dragons traveled on February 17th to Stony Creek. The score was unbearably close throughout the game. With just under 2 seconds left in the fourth quarter, Steve Zemieski scored a key 3-point goal and sent the game to overtime. Unfortunately for the Dragons, the Cougars were able to capitalize on some free throws and earn the victory in overtime. The final score was 60-55 in favor of Stony Creek. On February 17th, Lake Orion hosted a home game against a rival team, the Oxford Wildcats. The lead flip-flopped back and forth during the first half, with Oxford taking a 27-23 lead at halftime. The teams remained close in score throughout the remainder of the game, but Oxford would ultimately come out of the gate as a winner, 64-62. On February 9th, the wrestling squad hosted Rochester Adams, and Stony Creek for the district finals. Lake Orion first squared off against Stony Creek. The Cougars were no match for the Dragons. Lake Orion cruised to a 46-19 victory. Lake Orion would then wait and watch the remainder of the Rochester and Rochester Adams dueling it out to see who they would face next. Rochester Adams was able to squeeze out a 36-18 victory. The Dragons and the Highlanders then squared off for the district finals. Lake Orion held tough through the first half of the meet, but Adams Sr. stole the show. Rochester Adams pulled away and defeated the Dragons by a score of 46-19. That wrapped up this episode 21 of Lake Orion Sports Update. Tune in next time for our coverage of the winter season district playoffs. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.